Or good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to our webinar, VanillaStack. What is it? Where I'm going to present you what VanillaStack is all about, the ideas behind VanillaStack, and basically give you a short insight into how VanillaStack looks like. My name is Carsten Samaschke. I'm the CEO of Cloudical, and today I'm going to give you some very interesting insights. Feel free to ask me whenever you have questions. Feel free to reach out to me via my handle, via my Twitter handle. Feel free to ultimately demand the information you deserve to become. I'm happy that you made it possible to join in, and then let's start right away. First of all, before I basically jump into what VanillaStack is all about, let's talk a little bit about the past, because the past is very relevant to us now and basically relevant to why we decided to set up something like VanillaStack. The good old times, they are not so far away actually. This computer is like 35 years old. But the good old times, they are pretty much gone. And we need to accept that fact. The good old times, we basically did everything by hand. We basically had our servers, we know them by name, we jumped onto those servers and did our maintenance using SSH. Well, again, those times are gone because we are now and we are increasingly challenged with a lot of expectations and with a lot of requirements that are brought to us by our customers and stakeholders. And what they expect from us is basically greater flexibility in infrastructure. So they ask us and they want us to provide them with infrastructures whenever we need them, whenever we whenever they need them, whenever they ultimately decide that they want something to be rolled out, it has to be there. They want to see faster deployments. The time when we were allowed to roll out an application over the course of hours, perhaps days, they are gone. It's not acceptable anymore. We should be able to deliver faster reaction times when something goes wrong. The expectation is we are able to handle that and we are able to react accordingly. They expect better scalability from us, and obviously they expect 24/7 availability because our applications, our workloads are available everywhere worldwide, around the clock. Although we are currently perhaps a little bit hampered in regard to our travel opportunities, our applications and our workloads are not. They are still available everywhere. And they expect us to deliver more automation, to provide us with more automated environments. Reason for that is things can be rolled out faster and they can be rolled out repetitively without any issues in regards to, doing it by hand and then failing on that. And obviously, governance is a very important aspect as well. Customers, stakeholders want to know what is running, where it is running, why it is running, and if it is compliant to what they need. And that is basically the problem. Then they expect that to be delivered at lower costs. Well, that should not scare us, that should not make us sad or give us the impression that we won't be able to deliver. Rest assured, we can deliver. But the customers, then have another set of expectations that they want to be brought and want to be delivered upon, and that is basically the expectation of getting everything as a service. This as a service idea, this idea of basically just demanding something and somebody is rolling it out for us and maintaining it for us and running it for us, that idea is increasingly becoming important and visible. So we need to provide infrastructure as a service. We need to provide containers as a service, and we need to provide platform as a service. Ultimately, delivering something that might be called software as a service or environments as a service. Well, that sounds a little bit complex. That sounds a little bit not manageable with what we have on our hands and what is there. And so the basic idea of most of those who demand those service levels is to move into a cloud environment. I won't touch too much on the term cloud here in regards to rolling it out and saying, okay, what is cloud actually all about and what's not. I just stick with what the Cisco CEO, if I remember properly, once said. He said, I don't call it cloud, I call it fog, because everybody understands something different in regards to this term. So customers, we decide to move into cloud environments, and what we want to do there is, besides basically having an ease in regards to how infrastructures are managed, we want to see and we want to have our applications, our workloads being lifted over there. The approach is called lift and shift, where we basically just take our workloads, and with the workloads taken, we just run them. We don't change so much in regards to how infrastructures are set up. We don't change so much in regards to application architecture and application integration. We just use it as we did before. We basically exchange our internal data centers with something that is managed by somebody else. The most well-known organizations in that regard are Azure by Microsoft, Google Cloud, and obviously AWS, Amazon Web Services. So they and many other environments provide us with an ecosystem where we can basically roll out virtual machines and run our workloads the same way as we did before. Well, if you just do lift and shift, you might be able to lower your costs by, say, 20%, 25%, something along those lines, basically depending on what you have, how your cost structure internally looks like, and so on and so forth. But you won't be able to reach that kind of very, very, very compelling cost savings level where you might save around 50, 60, 70, perhaps even 80% of your infrastructure and operational costs. To accomplish that, one needs to go one step further, and that is basically bringing out infrastructures and bringing out workloads based on containers. Container technology is currently perceived as the ultimate solution to everything, right? So we bring everything into containers and we just roll it out and, well, off we go, right? Truth is, it's not that easy. Although it is quite simple and quite easy to roll out something on a container, to bring a container in production, with containers comes another level of complexity. Reason for that? Quite easy and quite simple. Usually, traditionally, an administrator would handle, I don't know, say a dozen of servers, each running a virtual machine or each consisting of a virtual machine running an application and being able to maintain that. With containers, you would basically shrink down the size of your workloads that are to be rolled out into way more manageable packages, because containers provide some sort of a very lightweight abstraction, lightweight virtualization, and that is awesome. But the problem is, or the consequence of that is that you would basically bring in more containers on the same amount of infrastructure. If your application supports that, you can run hundreds of containers on the same infrastructure as you would have ran like a dozen of virtual machines in the past. So if you think of that, that is an amazing difference. But if you think of that, the complexity of running those containers becomes evident, because the same administrator, the same operator who was running a dozen of virtual machines in the past now needs to run hundreds of containers at the same time. And that is basically impossible. What would you do? You would perhaps think of, okay, I add more people to the environment. So you would basically then again increase your costs. So could not be the proper solution. The proper solution typically is to be Kubernetes is to be perceived something like a container orchestrator, an infrastructure that is able to orchestrate and basically bring your containers into production. The most well-known container orchestrator nowadays is Kubernetes, and Kubernetes is basically the one kind of infrastructure that is running like 95% of all of the workloads. Why would you choose Kubernetes, which is frankly a very, very complex kind of infrastructure, providing you with a huge and very, very demanding learning curve? Well, you would do that because Kubernetes is providing you with the complete package. With Kubernetes, you would have something that orchestrates your containers, basically something that takes your containers and brings them into production. Your containers could provide self-healing functionalities. They could provide information about their health. Kubernetes would be able to understand that information and to act accordingly. If your container is going to fail, Kubernetes would manage that for you, which is awesome. Additionally, Kubernetes provides us with some sort of automatic load management, which is basically the ability to scale up and down according to regulations that we have given and according to rule sets that we have defined, and would basically allow us to again rest a little bit more assured that our workloads are working properly. Kubernetes is so popular because it is open source and it is secure by design. Again, 100% open source, and there is a huge community around Kubernetes. So if you see that and if you think of that, well, you might be tempted to become one of the 76% of organizations that are going to switch onto Kubernetes-based workloads throughout the next years. There was a Gartner study, or it was a study conducted just several weeks ago that basically brought out that number. The interesting thing is with Kubernetes, the assumption is that you solve all your problems, but to be honest, that's not true, because working with Kubernetes again provides a lot of challenges. I already discussed that a little bit. You have a very steep learning curve in regard to how you would set up your workloads, in regards to how you would run your workloads. Kubernetes is taking things differently. The Kubernetes approach is basically, it is in the name called container orchestrator, is basically an approach which orchestrates your containers. But if you think of that, that implies that Kubernetes is taking over control, that Kubernetes is the one component that is actually managing your containers. It's not you anymore. It's not your administrator anymore. It's Kubernetes, and that is something completely different from what we knew before, and that is something that is very scary to a lot of people, and it is something that you need to learn. Kubernetes works best if you basically let it do its job. On the other hand, Kubernetes is a very, very open platform, and being very open implies that you can bring in a lot of additional software, a lot of additional frameworks. Again, that comes at a cost, because when you want to set up and run Kubernetes properly, you would have huge integration efforts. And I'm speaking from our company's experience, because we did integration of infrastructures for the past years, day in, day out. That is one of the reasons why VanillaStack actually exists, and I'm coming to that in a few seconds. The effort of integrating your infrastructures with Kubernetes is very, very high. It's not because Kubernetes is a bad environment by any means. It isn't. It is an awesome environment. But you have so many options to integrate. You have so much complexity in integrating that is very, very challenging. Plus another aspect, which is quite often forgotten about, your applications need to be rewritten if you want to run them on Kubernetes. Because traditional applications, such as, I don't know, say Jira or other applications many development organizations use, they are not supposed to run on Kubernetes. Problem is not that you could not containerize them. You can containerize them without any issues, without any worries. That works out of the box and is pretty straightforward. But the problem is those applications are not meant to run in a volatile environment. Kubernetes is a very, very volatile environment. Kubernetes constantly monitors your ecosystem. It constantly looks upon and onto the nodes to understand which node has which workload. And if Kubernetes understands that it would be better to place an application onto another node, it would do that. And how would it do that, you ask? Good you asked. Glad you asked. Because Kubernetes would actually start a new instance of your application on another node and then shut down, or to be a little bit more precisely, quite often kill the old instance. And that would result in data losses. That would result in applications behaving in an unpredicted way, because they are not meant to be operated and they are not meant to run in such an environment. So applications that want to have the best of Kubernetes, that want to leverage the best of Kubernetes, need to be rewritten. They need to store their status outside their containers. They need to avoid using things like in-memory sessions. They simply need to be rewritten. They need to be able to run in an ever-changing environment. Another challenge with Kubernetes is to run Kubernetes properly, you require a lot of infrastructure and deployment automation. If you want to do things by hand with Kubernetes, well, frankly, good luck on that. You could do that, obviously, but it would drive you mad. It would create a lot of problems. It would create a lot of challenges that might not be easily solved. Kubernetes is a very, very demanding environment. If, for example, the times on several nodes are basically too different from each other, Kubernetes would not be able to work with those nodes properly. And if it would be the master nodes, your Kubernetes cluster would actually, shut down and would not be able to run anymore. So keep that in mind. To run Kubernetes properly, to run your workloads on Kubernetes properly, you definitely want to have everything automated. Again, that's a challenge in itself, and it is a challenge on the level of mindset, on the level of those who work with and on Kubernetes. Another challenge with Kubernetes is basically actually one of its advantages. Kubernetes is meant to run containers only, period. You cannot directly run things like traditional virtual machines on top of Kubernetes. There's a new project called KubeVirt, which is able to do that, but you then again need to set it up. You then again need to ensure that it is properly set up, that it is properly rolled out, and again, that needs to be done by somebody. Another challenge, and I don't want to scare you, I just want to give you a very, very realistic picture on things. Another challenge is that a Kubernetes rollout on its own is not production ready. It might sound a little bit strange, but it is true, because Kubernetes on its own is just a container operator. There is no answer within Kubernetes in its default state on how to provide storage, for example, to your containers. Because if you want to store data, you don't want to store the data inside your containers, because once your container instance is gone, the data is gone. So you need to store it externally. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of opportunities to do that and approaches to do that, but it needs to be set up, it needs to be configured, and it better scales jointly with your cluster. It better provides failover functionalities. It better is high available. So to ensure that your Kubernetes cluster is production ready, you want to provide it with storage. And you want to ensure that the storage you provide with and your Kubernetes cluster you are running it with are compatible with each other and are integrated with each other and are basically working flawlessly with each other. Good luck on that if you do it the first time. From my own experience, let me tell you that way. Let me tell it that way. I miserably failed on that. It took me days, if not weeks, to achieve something which is or which could be called production ready. That takes a lot of time. And the last challenge is that Kubernetes is a completely open source product, which is awesome. But most of the Kubernetes installations that you might find and most of the Kubernetes installation that you might look upon are actually commercial Kubernetes installations. And those commercial Kubernetes installations are quite often completely vendor locked. So for example, if you want to run Red Hat's OpenShift, which is an awesome Kubernetes distribution, you can only run it on top of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So your Kubernetes is tied to a Red Hat Linux. And if you want to run, say, virtual machines in parallel, you want to set up something like OpenStack, for example, to run containerized workloads alongside virtualized workloads, you would be forced to do that with Red Hat's OpenShift distribution only, because it's not supposed to work differently. And if you want to bring in the bespoke storage, for example, you would be forced to use Red Hat's enterprise storage. Alternatively, you would be forced to do a lot of integrational efforts on your own. So quite often, and you should be very, very careful on that, your Kubernetes distributions are completely vendor locked, although they are supposed to be very open and although the vendors claim that they are open. On top and to the outside world, they are open. So if you run something on Kubernetes, it does not matter where you run it because it's Kubernetes. So you say your workload runs the same way on top of a Red Hat Kubernetes compared to a SUSE Kubernetes, compared to a canonical Kubernetes, compared to a Microsoft Azure Kubernetes. But taking all of those challenges into account, thinking of things like automation, thinking of how you would be forced to solve all those problems, you might realize Kubernetes, and let me call it that way, a cloud stack, are something that are very demanding And that is true, but there's a solution to that. And that is where VanillaStack comes into the game. VanillaStack is basically the result of what we at Cloudical did for the past 3 years. We did a lot of integrational efforts. We did a lot of integrational projects with a lot of cloud native infrastructures. So we day in, day out set up stacks based on Kubernetes, including OpenStack, including Cloud Foundry, including Prometheus, including many other frameworks, be it proprietary, be it open source. We did that day in, day out. And frankly, and to be honest, it was and is nicely and easily earned money. So what is wrong with that? Well, the problem is, again, it is always the same. And we do that always along those lines of vendor-locked software and or along those lines of basically solutions that are not supposed to be rolled out into production, because things like object storage and things like a proper sizing are missing. So we figured it makes a lot of sense to bring out something which basically takes away the complexity and makes it easy to run your containerized workloads. And that is VanillaStack. VanillaStack is basically an enterprise open source cloud stack. It is based on Kubernetes. And I go as far as to say we at Cloudical understand Kubernetes as our operating system. That is something completely different from what, for example, Red Hat or Canonical are doing. They understand Linux rightfully as their operating systems. We say we don't care about which version of Linux you are running, which distribution of Linux you are running. We say bring your own Linux. And VanillaStack basically expects a modern Linux distribution and is rolling out on top of that, regardless of the vendor of your Linux. So if you want to bring in your community Linux, feel free to do so. If you want to bring in your Red Hat Enterprise Linux, feel free to do so. We highly appreciate any kind of modern Linux, because frankly and quite openly, for most of the situations, for most of the environments and for most of the workloads, you don't need all of those advantages that something like an enterprise grade Linux would bring you, because Kubernetes as an operating system is the component that is basically able to deal with nodes shutting down and restarting, providing new functionalities, adding new nodes onto the game. That is done by Kubernetes, so we do not need to care about that on a Linux level anymore. To us, Linux is a little bit like a driver on traditional operating systems. And since we are basically committed to provide you with something that does not lock you in, we provide you with the best community projects. But we understand that you need to have commercial support, so you get everything with full commercial support. And I get onto that in a few minutes and again, but let that sink in. VanillaStack provides you with basically the same functionality as many of the other stacks, but without the complexity of having to set that up on your own, without the complexity of having to integrate all of those things on your own. We do that for you. We do that for you out of the box. All you need to do is set it up and then lean back and enjoy your operations. Again, VanillaStack is a true open source project. We love open source. We go as far as to basically eliminate any kind of proprietary software from our internal environments. VanillaStack, the whole stack of VanillaStack, is open source. And within VanillaStack, within the things that you install initially, let me put it that way, and I cover that in a few minutes then again as well, we only provide you with 100% open source projects. And that gives you something that you might not be used to. It gives you trust. It gives you trustworthiness, because you can rest assured that everything we roll out is not vendor locked and is open source. And the name VanillaStack is basically coming from exactly that fact. We are using the vanilla versions of Kubernetes. We are using the vanilla versions of OpenStack. We are using the vanilla versions of KubeVirt. We are using the vanilla versions of Cloud Foundry and any other product that is part of the stack. And since we utilize those community projects so much, we give back. We support back to the community. So our goal is to basically contribute back and to make sure that the community versions and the community iterations of those projects that we are using are increasingly becoming stronger, better, and more reliable. Again, very important to us, it is without any kind of vendor lock. Run VanillaStack on top of your Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We are great with that. We are good with that. Set up something on top of VanillaStack that is by some random vendor. No issues with that. We do not require you to utilize our solution. So VanillaStack does not provide you with any vendor lock. And it is always bundled with Rook object storage. And that is something that we are very, very proud of, because Rook is the #1 Kubernetes storage solution. Rook is open on its own. It's an open source project. And Cloudical is basically amongst the 4 biggest contributors to Rook. So to us, it is very obvious that we take away the burden from you to roll out storage, because we do that. We are able to do that, and we do that while we are installing Kubernetes. VanillaStack is then again something that is more, because VanillaStack wants to be and wants to provide you with a complete stack. Again, we start from bottom to top on the container and container orchestration level. We use Kubernetes for that. If you want to have your containers up and running, we can utilize different container runtimes, be it Docker, be it CRI-O. We are able to roll them out, we are able to configure them, we are able to set them up. And we provide you with a service mesh. So you would be able to basically ensure that dedicated calls are reaching the proper workloads. We do that with Istio. If you want to have storage, and you want to have storage, I promise you, you utilize Rook. For non-Kubernetes workloads, we can provide you with Ceph storage, which is another open source storage framework. If you don't want to utilize Ceph, well, we have NetApp Trident integrated. So you would be able to ultimately leverage your NetApp appliances with VanillaStack. And for your backup, we provide you with Velero backup. If you want to have your infrastructure, your virtual machines up and running on VanillaStack, no problems, because we roll out OpenStack for you, and we roll that out very, very fast. VanillaStack is able to roll out a complete working infrastructure as a service environment based on OpenStack within, depending on your infrastructure, within 30 minutes. And that rollout is production grade. It is not some random, I don't know, workload, some random OpenStack installation that might crash when there comes load. No, it is production grade. And it runs on top of Kubernetes. So you would basically ensure that your virtual machines that you provision with OpenStack would have the best underlying environment, because Kubernetes does a lot of the load balancing, a lot of the keep alive, and a lot of the operations already. If you want to know more about OpenStack, let me put it that way, most of the smaller clouds are running with OpenStack. If you don't want to run OpenStack, you would perhaps want to leverage a little bit less functionality, you can utilize KubeVirt with VanillaStack. And since VanillaStack is internally using Ansible and Terraform, those frameworks are at your disposal as well. If you are more into developing your own applications instead of just running them, we provide you with a very easy way of rolling out a Cloud Foundry instance. Cloud Foundry, you might have heard about that, is one of the best platform as a service solutions. It provides you with all the governance you need, and it provides you with an amazing approach towards your workloads, because you just check in your code, everything else is done automatically by Cloud Foundry. And that is a difference to, for example, GitLab CI, which is available on the platform as well, because with GitLab you would create your own pipelines. Cloud Foundry does that automatically for you. We would also provide you with Jenkins, and very importantly to us, we are able to install Harbor on your own VanillaStack, and that would imply that you have a very trustworthy environment, because with Harbor you have your own private Docker registry. So you are not dependent on something that is managed and run by other organizations. Harbor provides you with the good feeling of having your workloads at your disposal on your platform. If you have that platform up and running, you want obviously to operate it properly. That is why VanillaStack allows you to roll out Prometheus and Grafana already in a pre-configured way. So you just roll it out and it works. If you want to have a little bit more integration with your own workloads, or if you want to ensure that you are properly handling your log files, there is Elasticsearch, Fluentd, and Kibana at your disposal. And if you want to understand if something and what goes wrong with your workloads in regards to where it gets slow, where it might become a little bit troubled, Jaeger as a tracing solution is also part of VanillaStack. The security level is handled by Keycloak, so you are able to provide your customers, you are able to provide your workloads with a centralized authentication and authorization framework. And for more specific security approaches, Flaco, Aqua, and Claire are also part of the stack. And you might ask, okay, a lot of infrastructure, but how do I actually manage that? Well, there is Vanilla Installer and Vanilla Store for you. And I show you Vanilla Installer in a few minutes. Vanilla Store is basically the solution that is later on utilized once your cluster is set up. With Vanilla Installer, you roll out the very basic version of VanillaStack, including many, not all, but many of the actually mentioned frameworks here. And with Vanilla Store, you're able to add additional workloads, you are able to control your clusters, and you are able to basically run updates on everything. And you might ask, okay, do I need something specific for it? No, just your browser, because one of the very important things with VanillaStack is that we take away the complexity of setting up and running your workloads, because to us, simplicity is the best. So we run out and we run an environment where we are able to roll out the components initially automatically. That initial installation is done via our Vanilla installer. Again, I showcased it to you in a few minutes. Installations and updates are handled by Vanilla App Store. Importantly, everything we roll out is already integrated and operable. And since everything is based on containers, you can simply roll back everything. If something goes wrong, if you deploy something that you don't want to see anymore on your environment, just roll it back. And how would you roll it back? Well, we are again shipping the vanilla versions of the product. So you would just use whatever you would use with any kind of traditional or with any kind of open source Kubernetes installation, kubectl. Or with Cloud Foundry, you would use the CF tool. No need for you to install additional tools. No need for you to rely on some vendor that is basically preventing you and prohibiting you from using those well-known and widely available tools. And again, you become commercial support for the complete platform. Platform is another thing I want to cover just shortly, because we actually don't want to provide you with a platform. We want to provide you with an ecosystem. That ecosystem starts with Vanilla Installer and Vanilla Store. It provides you with all of the out-of-box integrations and functionality. Importantly, it can be expanded with a huge amount of open source and commercial components. And again, although VanillaStack is completely open source, we obviously provide you with the choice that you need. And if you are not happy with what we provide you, well, it's still containers. So you can run everything on top of Kubernetes the way you want it to run. That gives you something that is very important. It gives you trustworthiness. It gives you trust into the environment, because VanillaStack is 100% open source, and we, as Cloudical, give you 100% of commercial support for everything. So it's not just commercial support for Kubernetes, it is commercial support for everything. Every application you roll out using Vanilla Installer or Vanilla Store is supported by us. If you bring in applications using those sources, you can basically rely on our support and services team. They will take over if something goes wrong. And you might ask, where is it running? Well, that's again quite simple. It runs everywhere. Since VanillaStack is understanding Kubernetes as its operating system, we have nothing that imposes, I don't know, some sort of a lock onto you onto where you would run it. You can run it on bare metal, you can run it on VMs, you can run it on your private cloud environment, you can run it on public cloud environments, and you can run it on the big clouds such as Oracle, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. You might ask, okay, sounds nice, but what are the system requirements? Again, it's basically just that. Any modern Linux with container support would do. We ask you to provide raw devices for Rook object storage, but that is easily be done. And as a minimum, you would provide machines with 4 GB of RAM and 20 GB of storage and 1 core for your masters, and 2 GB of RAM, 20 GB of storage, and 1 core for your workers. So how would you roll out VanillaStack then? Well, let me show that to you. I showed it and I showcased to you that in an environment where I would basically would be able to roll out VanillaStack in production grade, but given the advanced time, I just showcased the installer to you, and everything else is basically beyond scope now. So if you start VanillaStack and if you set up VanillaStack, you basically do that on a website. So you would basically accept our terms and conditions, and then you would basically go and ensure that you make the right decision in the very beginning. And that decision is basically the question how you would want to run your Kubernetes cluster. The first decision you have to make is, do you want to have your Kubernetes cluster as high available cluster, or as, more like a test or development cluster? Just flip the switch here. If you do not want to run it as an HA cluster, well, 1 master node is enough. But if you want to run it as an HA cluster, you would be forced to have and provide 3 master nodes. Then you would decide how many worker nodes you want to have. We start with 3 worker nodes. Frankly, it won't make sense, not even on a development cluster, to run it with less power and with less machines or virtual machines. Because we always provide you with persistent storage. That is based on top of Rook. And if you happen to know Rook a little bit, Rook then again is a very open environment, so you can basically use that with a bunch of other environments and ecosystems. So you could store your data on Ceph, you could store your data on databases. Everything is covered by Rook to your applications and to your Kubernetes cluster. Regardless of the backend, the storage looks as if it was ordinary storage. If you want to install OpenStack, well, just press and toggle that switch, and the same is true for Cloud Foundry. We have a minimum of 3 workers again, and now in the next step you would be required to roll out an SSH key onto any of your nodes. Why would you do that? Well, because we don't want you to expose your private key and give us access to that. So we create a private key on our installer, and you would roll out the public key. You can later on remove your public key whenever you want to do that. We do that automatically once the installation is done. But if you feel like, yeah, there's something going wrong, then just stop the installation and remove the SSH key. That is the only situation where you would be forced to actually use a terminal. Everything else is done by Vanilla. So once you did that, press the button and say that you copied the key to all the nodes, and then you would basically give us the information which nodes you want to use. In my test environment, I go with internal nodes and internal IPs. I just need to add the username once, and then I can basically just go ahead and add the IP addresses of my nodes in the beginning again for the master node, and then we repeat the same for all of the workers. So my workers are starting with 30. So I just give that information. I can keep the same username. I can change that to my liking, either for all of the workers or on each of the workers. Then again, and now I need to ensure that I assign all the workloads to all the nodes. Why isn't that done automatically? Well, reason is, if you have a bigger cluster, you want to make sure that you are just rolling out specific workloads onto the nodes as you define it. So we give you that option. Here, with the smallest version of the cluster, you need to assign all of the workloads to all of the cluster. So once you did that, we provide you and we require you to give us a chance to validate whether all of the nodes are available and whether they basically comply with what we define as requirements. So you press the validate nodes button, and now, and that is already done, all of the nodes are checked, and if they are compliant with what we require you to roll out, well, you get that information and you just see the state becoming green. Once that is done, press the next button, and now you give the information about your cluster. You can either say you are using an internal IP address and an internal load balancer, or you can define that you would use an external load balancer, but you would be forced to give then again access to that machine in regard to giving us information where it is, how it is named. Next step, very importantly, provide us with a cluster name. So the cluster name in this case is, is test claudical.net. And once that is done, another level of comfort is basically coming into the game, because we use that domain name you gave us and pre-populate the other fields in the next screens according to your information. We have an integration with Let's Encrypt out of the box. So we are able to provide you with a communications towards those using your workloads that is always SSL secured. So to do that, you need to provide us, or you need to provide the installer with a working email address. And you can switch between two stages, between two versions of Let's Encrypt, either staging, which is very suitable for non-production or test workloads, or production, which is meant to be rolled out on production-grade clusters. You need to ensure that you make the right decision here, because if you happen to choose production and then delete your cluster and reset it up with the same email address and the same IP addresses, Let's Encrypt would basically prevent you from doing that for a short period of time. That could be very, very disturbing and annoying. That's why we default to a staging environment. You can obviously change that. Then we go into all of the applications, and you can basically just set and define all of the settings. So we are here on Rook. So if you want to enable the Rook dashboard, just do that here. No need for you to basically work with any kind of configuration files. We keep you out of that game. And then you do the same for OpenStack. And OpenStack is a very, very complex environment, very complex system, because it is used to provide you with an infrastructure as a service ecosystem. And let me put it that way, we cannot take away all the complexity. But what we do is we basically provide you with a very easy to use platform where you can basically choose which OpenStack distribution you would want to roll out. And then all of the settings are pre-populated. You can just leave them as we defined them, but you can obviously change them according to your needs. Once you are done, press next. You can now do the same for Cloud Foundry because we selected that initially. And now comes a very interesting screen where you can select additional tools to be rolled out. Those additional tools are tools that allow you to basically have a very, very, very complete installation out of the box without having to do additional installing steps and installer steps later on. So make your selection here. I keep it with the defaults. The defaults is we install Harbor, Prometheus, and Grafana, so you can do your operations and you can locally on your cluster store your container images. We install Nginx Ingress, we install Cert Manager out of the box, and for those who want it, we also install the good old Kubernetes dashboard. Everything out of the box. Once you have done that, press the next button so you can see the summary page. You can jump into each of the settings sections then here again and adjust that to your likings. And once you are done, just press the install button and all the magic starts. So now it's a good time to enjoy your coffee or your tea. And it's a good time for us to speak a little bit about what VanillaStack is suited for while the installation is running. Well, what are typical use cases for Kubernetes and for VanillaStack? We basically checked VanillaStack and we set it up so it would be able to provide you with OpenStack. I actually talked about that a little bit. So if you want to run OpenStack on top of your VanillaStack, no worries. We use OpenStack Helm. We actually manage everything in regards to storage. You can install it via the App Store, or you can use the installer as just shown. Rollout and operations in less than 40 minutes. Typically, we manage to do that within 30 minutes. We would recommend having something like 3 masters and 5 workers. OpenStack is pretty demanding, so you would need to add a lot of CPU cores to the game and a lot of memory. But rest assured, then again, that kind of infrastructure does not cost you more, because we, Cloudical, do not charge you for the number of cores you use or for the amount of RAM you utilize. If you happen to be a little bit more on the software development side of things, we can provide you with a very simplistic approach on how to set those things up. So VanillaStack for ISVs would basically consist of Kubernetes as a base. You would use Harbor for your images, and you've just seen it. I just started to roll out. You would use Rook as storage. you would use Istio as service mesh and then roll out GitLab, Jenkins or Cloud Foundry to your needs. Everything is included inside of Vanilla Installer and or Vanilla Store. The demand is not that high in that regard, in regards to the infrastructure. 3 masters, 3 workers and some storage. And if you want to set up something that is basically just running workloads for ops teams, you would basically roll out Prometheus, Grafana, Elk or VStacks, Rook or Ceph as storage. We roll it out. It's easy usable. Again, it is not that demanding. So that's awesome. That's good to know. But what about subscriptions? And more importantly, what about support? Good question. Again, glad you asked. Because with VanillaStack, we do not leave you alone with the complexities. With VanillaStack, we provide you with a complete package, so you would be able to utilize VanillaStack without any worries. We provide you with 3 different approaches to support. First approach is VanillaStack Flat. That would basically imply that you are charged a fixed fee per node, but there is no additional charging for dependencies such as processes, RAM, and so on and so forth. The calculation is very simple. You pay per node. We do not care about how big your nodes are. It is your choice. It is your environment. All we are interested in is the number of nodes. You can do that in 2 or in several different subscription intervals, starting with an annual subscription. This can be expanded to a 2-year subscription, but if that is too expensive for you in regards to paying a one-time fee, we totally understand that. So we provide you with different payment intervals, monthly, quarterly, every 6 months, or according to your subscription interval. Always included is a complete set of commercial support. We provide you with up to 24/7 SLAs, so you would be able to have it for your most demanding and most important workloads. And again, our commercial support for VanillaStack Flat is a flat rate support. All products delivered and installed with VanillaStack are supported by us. So whatever you install, reach out to our support team and, get your support. All the things that we roll out through using Vanilla App Store or Vanilla Installer are supported. Everything. And that includes even commercial applications. And obviously, it includes Kubernetes, Vanilla Installer, and the Vanilla Store. Again, SLAs, 2 levels, 9x5 with a 4-hour response time, or Gold with a 24/7 and a 1-hour response time. Always part of the game. Access to our update service, access to our support service, to our support forums, and a personal contact, a real person you can talk to. If that is a little bit, too much in regards to, already for specific products, how to operate them, how to run them, and so on and so forth, rest assured, we got you covered. Because what we also offer is a second support option, which is called VanillaStack Modular. And the idea behind that is, again, you just pay per node and you build your own subscription. You only pay for the levels you need support for. It's a pay-as-you-go approach, so you just pay as long as you need it. Our subscription intervals for VanillaStack Modular start with a 1-month subscription. So if you just want to roll it out, you need commercial support for that, just purchase it for 1 month. After that month, you still can run VanillaStack, but you do all the support on your own. You can have it for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. Always, again, with commercial support, so we provide you with 24/7 SLAs if you need them. The commercial support, again, is the cloud model. You pay for what you need as long as you need it. So you do not have a long-term commitment. It's not like with some of the other vendors where you have to sign up for annual contracts. That's not true here. We always include commercial applications that you roll out with VanillaStack store, and it obviously includes Kubernetes, our installer, and our store. You can run VanillaStack with the Modular subscription for free, actually. So there is one SLA that is called Community SLA, where you would basically be able to run the commercial product. You would get your support via the community forums. If you want to have more, if you want to have our team at your side, choose the bronze option with 9x5 support and an 8-hour response window via email, or choose the silver and gold options that are actually known to you from VanillaStack flat. Always included then again, access to our update service, access to our support forums. Still not what you need? No worries, there's a third option. That option is called Expert Call. And with Expert Call, you would become the whole treatment of support, but on a pay-per-incident basis. So you do not have to pay any kind of fixed fees. You don't need to have a subscription interval. You don't even need to have a VanillaStack subscription or whatever. Just roll it out, and if something goes wrong, ask our team. And Expert Call is available again for all the applications that we roll out with VanillaStack, and that's different to the other support levels, it is available for your own Linux applications and for your own Linux installations, for your own Linux installations as well. So if you have Linux up and running and something is going wrong, when you do that and when you run it with VanillaStack, reach out. Our experts will take a look at it and then help you there. Again, different SLAs, 9x5 and 24/7. By the way, let's have a short look on the installation. Again, I was working in an environment where everything is locally, so it's quite fast. The installation already finished, and then you can basically see you have access to your OpenStack using your OpenStack password. You can access the Cloud Foundry installation using the Cloud Foundry password, and if you want to work with Kubernetes directly, you can download the kubectl config for your VanillaStack installation. It's just a text file you download and then ultimately bring onto your environment, and you can work with that on VanillaStack. So back to my presentation. There are then again some additional services available. The first additional service is Managed Pass. That is a managed service for VanillaStack. We set up your ecosystem. We set up your VanillaStack for you. We configure it. We adjust it to your needs, and we run it for you. With Managed Pass, your commercial subscription, and it's the flat rate subscription, is always inclusive. We run it for you. If you happen to have applications you want to be taken care of, you should look for our managed SaaS offering, because it's again managed service for VanillaStack and it's managed service for your workloads. Our team does everything for you. All you need to do is basically decide for that. We set it up, we bring on your workloads, we manage them, we provide you with several SLAs, and obviously the whole commercial support is already included. Last but not least, 2 points. First of all, availability. When is and will VanillaStack be available? Well, the preview versions are available today. The same is true for the Vanilla installer. So you can just grab it and try it out on your own. Vanilla Store will be available on the 29th of September. That is the date when we release the final version of VanillaStack, the final initial version. Forums are available today, documentation is available today, commercial support starts on the 29th of September. We also provide you with a short insight into our roadmap. More on that is to come over the next weeks. We have support for Fedora and CentOS today. We will have support, official support for Debian and Ubuntu on the 29th. We also support commercial Linuxes. We checked that out. It actually works, but giving you support on that is available for Red Hat Enterprise Linux from October, and for SUSE later this year. We will announce it accordingly. And I just want to bring something onto your attention. We will provide you with something we call a remote installer. That will be something that is basically able to install your VanillaStack installation from our website. Basically the same as you have seen, but you do not need to download anything, you do not need to do anything, just log in, roll out your installation, and off you go. That one will be available from November. Obviously, it's not working for private environments where no external access is possible, but for any other environment it would be possible. And we will provide you with a cloud installer as well. That cloud installer will commission and roll out a cloud environment for your VanillaStack on at least Azure and AWS in December. The team is working intensively on that, and that would give you a completely wireless solution. You would simply log in and say, I want to have my VanillaStack on Azure or AWS, and then ultimately the cloud installer would provide the VPCs, would provide all the other required infrastructure, install VanillaStack for you, and you would have your own trustworthy cloud stack on the hyperscaler of your choice at your disposal. The only thing you need to do is then grab a cup of coffee or drink a tea and wait for half an hour or an hour, and then everything is ready for you. If you want to learn more, if you want to get in touch with us, do that at vanillastack.io. And if you want to talk about VanillaStack, use the hashtag VanillaStack. There's way more in the coming, but I'm going to stop here now. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for joining this webinar. If there are any questions, feel free to reach out. VanillaStack.io is a good place to start. If not, look for me. I'm the CEO of Cloudical. You might find me on the internet. So I'm really much looking forward towards your feedback and towards your experiences. And thank you again for joining today. Thank you again for being here in such huge numbers. Enjoy your day. See you later.